The federal courthouse in downtown Boston stood tall against the morning sky, its imposing structure a testament to the gravity of justice served within its walls. On this particular Tuesday morning, the atmosphere in courtroom 7B was thick with the usual mix of tension and tedium that accompanied traffic court proceedings. Judge Patricia Henderson, known for her no-nonsense approach and quick wit, had already processed dozens of cases since 8 a.m. As the clock struck 10:30, the bailiff called out the next case. Citation number 47829, speeding violation on Interstate 95. The defendant who walked forward didn't match the typical profile of traffic court attendees. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches with broad shoulders and wearing an oversized hoodie that seemed to swallow his frame, the young man's presence immediately commanded attention. "Your Honor," he began, his voice surprisingly soft for his size, "I'd like to contest this ticket." The judge peered over her reading glasses, taking in his casual attire, the hoodie, basketball shorts, and what appeared to be expensive but well-worn running shoes. "And you are?" Judge Henderson's tone carried the slight edge of someone who had seen too many young people treat her courtroom with less respect than it deserved. "Robert Thompson, ma'am." His posture remained perfectly straight, hands clasped behind his back in what appeared to be a habitual stance. The judge glanced down at the citation. "Mr. Thompson, you were caught doing 87 in a 65 zone. That's not a minor infraction. Do you have any explanation for why you were in such a hurry?" "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Robert's calm demeanor never wavered. "But I'd prefer to explain the circumstances privately, if possible." A few snickers echoed through the courtroom. Judge Henderson herself couldn't suppress a small smile. "Mr. Thompson, this is traffic court. We don't do private conferences. Whatever you need to say, you can say it here." Robert shifted slightly, his expression remaining neutral. "With all due respect, Your Honor, the matter involves sensitive information related to my occupation." "Unless you're James Bond," the judge quipped, earning more laughs from the gallery, "I think we can handle it in open court." The young man reached slowly into his hoodie pocket, causing the bailiff to step forward instinctively. But Robert only withdrew a leather wallet, which he opened to reveal a gleaming badge. "United States Secret Service, Your Honor. At the time of the citation, I was conducting a protective surveillance operation." The laughter in the courtroom died instantly. Judge Henderson's smile faded as she examined the badge and credentials that were brought to her bench. The bailiff, who had moved closer to inspect them, nodded in confirmation. "On the morning in question," Robert continued, his voice remaining low and measured, "we had received credible intelligence about a potential threat to one of our protectees. I was part of the advance team running route surveillance when I received the call to increase our security presence. The speed was necessary to ensure we maintained our protective bubble." The judge's earlier amusement had transformed into professional interest. "Why didn't you simply inform the officer of your status when you were pulled over?" "Protocol, Your Honor. We're trained not to reveal our status unless absolutely necessary." The operation was still active, and identifying myself as Secret Service could have compromised our security arrangements. I accepted the citation with the intention of explaining the circumstances here in court, though I had hoped to do so more discreetly. Judge Henderson leaned back in her chair, studying the young man before her with new eyes. The casual attire that had initially seemed inappropriate for court now made perfect sense. It was exactly what an agent would wear to blend in during surveillance work. "The Secret Service," she mused aloud, "that's quite a responsibility for someone who looks so young. How long have you been with the service?" 6 years, Your Honor. Started right after college and military service." The gallery, which had been silent since the revelation of Robert's badge, now buzzed with quiet murmurs. Several people who had been half-dozing through the mundane proceedings sat up straighter, their attention captured by this unexpected turn of events. "Your Honor," the city prosecutor spoke up, "we've confirmed Mr. Thompson's credentials with his field office. Given the circumstances, the state would like to move for dismissal of the citation. Judge Henderson nodded slowly, but her expression remained thoughtful. Mr. Thompson, while I appreciate the vital nature of your work, I hope you understand that even law enforcement must balance public safety with their duties. High-speed driving, regardless of the circumstances, puts other motorists at risk. Absolutely, Your Honor, Robert replied. We take those considerations very seriously. In this instance, the route had been pre-cleared by our team, and we had coordinated with local law enforcement for any necessary support. The speed was calculated based on operational necessity while maintaining safety parameters. The judge's stern expression softened slightly. Very well. Given the circumstances and verification of your status, this court will dismiss the citation. However, she added, fixing Robert with a pointed look, I trust that in the future, you'll continue to exercise appropriate judgment in balancing your duties with public safety. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Robert's response was crisp and professional, his posture never wavering from its military precision. As he turned to leave the courtroom, several observers couldn't help but steal additional glances at the young man who had so thoroughly upended their expectations. The judge's earlier laughter at his expense now seemed a distant memory, replaced by a newfound respect for the quiet professionals who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to protect the nation's leaders. Outside the courthouse, Robert merged seamlessly into the flow of pedestrian traffic, his oversized hoodie once again serving its purpose of making him forgettable. Few of the passers-by would have guessed that the young man in casual attire was one of the elite agents tasked with protecting the country's most important figures. And that was exactly how he preferred it, invisible, underestimated, but always vigilant. The morning sun had risen higher, casting sharp shadows across the courthouse steps. As Robert checked his phone, a series of encrypted messages indicated that his next assignment was already waiting. The traffic court appearance had been a brief interruption in his daily duties, a momentary lifting of the veil that typically concealed his true role from public view. Within minutes, he would be back on the job, once again anonymous and unnoticed, just another face in the crowd, carrying out his vital mission without fanfare or recognition. This incident would become a story shared in hushed tones around the courthouse, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving and that heroes often walked among them in the most unexpected guises. For Judge Henderson, it served as a humbling reminder that even after years on the bench, she could still be surprised by the depth and complexity of the cases, and people, who appeared before her. The story of the Secret Service agent in Judge Henderson's courtroom spread quickly through the legal community of Boston. What made it particularly intriguing wasn't just the revelation itself, but the events that unfolded in the following weeks, revealing layers of complexity that no one in that courtroom could have anticipated. 2 weeks after the traffic court incident, Judge Henderson was reviewing cases in her chambers when her clerk brought in an unusual request. A sealed letter had arrived from the Department of Homeland Security, requesting a private meeting. The judge's curiosity was piqued. Such requests were rare, especially in connection with a simple traffic court case. The meeting took place on a rainy Thursday afternoon. 2 senior Secret Service officials arrived at her chambers, their demeanor professional but urgent. What they shared with her made the judge's earlier courtroom interaction with Robert seem like merely the tip of an iceberg. Your Honor, began Deputy Director Chen, his voice measured and careful, what appeared to be a routine traffic stop that day was part of a much larger operation. Agent Thompson's presence in your courtroom, while unplanned, helped maintain our surveillance cover. The judge listened intently as the officials explained that Robert's team had been tracking a sophisticated counterfeiting ring that had been targeting diplomatic events. The speed violation occurred during surveillance of a suspect who had been attempting to infiltrate high-security diplomatic functions using forged credentials. The day Agent Thompson appeared in your court, continued Special Agent in Charge Williams, we had 5 teams positioned around the city. The traffic stop could have compromised months of careful planning, but his handling of the situation actually helped reinforce his cover. Judge Henderson learned that the casual attire she had initially dismissed wasn't just for surveillance, it was part of a carefully crafted persona. Robert had been posing as a food delivery driver, allowing him to move freely through various security checkpoints without raising suspicion. His appearance in traffic court, while unplanned, had provided an unexpected opportunity to strengthen this cover. The suspects were monitoring all law enforcement interactions, explained Deputy Director Chen. If Agent Thompson had identified himself to the traffic officer or requested special treatment, it could have raised red flags. His decision to take the citation and appear in court actually helped convince the surveillance team monitoring him that he was exactly who he appeared to be, just another delivery driver. The judge's chambers fell silent as she processed this information. Her initial amusement at Robert's appearance, followed by her surprise at his revelation, now seemed almost naive in light of the operation's true scope. "There's more, Your Honor," Agent Williams continued. "The day after the court appearance, our target made a crucial mistake. Believing the heightened security presence had been reduced, they attempted to move a significant quantity of counterfeit credentials. We were able to intercept the materials and make several key arrests. The operation had led to the discovery of an underground printing facility in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Boston. The counterfeiting ring had been producing not just fake currency, but elaborate diplomatic credentials that could have compromised national security. Agent Thompson's team recovered over $5 million in counterfeit bills and prevented what could have been a serious breach of diplomatic security," Deputy Director Chen concluded. His handling of the traffic court appearance played a significant role in maintaining the operation's integrity. Judge Henderson thought back to the young man who had stood before her bench. His quiet confidence and measured responses now took on new meaning. She realized that even while maintaining his cover, he had shown her the respect her position demanded while protecting the sensitive nature of his mission. The meeting concluded with a request for continued discretion about the details of the operation. As the officials prepared to leave, Deputy Director Chen shared one final piece of information that left the judge momentarily speechless. "Agent Thompson's work wasn't just about counterfeiting, Your Honor. One of the diplomatic events being targeted was going to be attended by 3 former presidents. If those counterfeit credentials had made it into the wrong hands." He left the sentence unfinished, but its implications hung heavy in the air. After the officials left, Judge Henderson remained in her chambers, reflecting on the complex web of security and surveillance that operated just beneath the surface of daily life. The simple traffic court case had offered a rare glimpse into this hidden world. Later that evening, as she prepared to leave the courthouse, she noticed a food delivery driver in an oversized hoodie walking past the building. For a brief moment, she thought she recognized Robert's profile, but when she looked again, the figure had disappeared into the crowd. The judge smiled to herself, wondering how many other unsung guardians moved through the city, hiding in plain sight. Her courtroom encounter with Robert Thompson had taught her a valuable lesson about presumptions and appearances. In a world where security threats lurked in unexpected places, the most effective protectors were often those who went unnoticed. The incident changed how Judge Henderson approached her traffic court sessions. While she maintained her firm and fair demeanor, there was a new undertone of consideration in her interactions with defendants. After all, she had learned firsthand that extraordinary circumstances could lie behind the most ordinary-seeming cases. As weeks passed, the story of the Secret Service agent in traffic court became something of a legend in the courthouse. While the full details of the counterfeiting operation remained classified, the basic narrative of the underestimated agent served as a reminder that justice and security often worked in mysterious ways. For the other regulars in courtroom 7B, the bailiffs, clerks, and attorneys who witnessed the original interaction, the incident added an element of intrigue to their daily routines. Every casual delivery person or unremarkable passerby now carried the possibility of being something more than they appeared. The judge kept the detailed briefing about the operation to herself, honoring the request for discretion. But occasionally, when faced with a defendant whose story seemed improbable, she would remember the young man in the oversized hoodie and remind herself that sometimes the most unlikely explanations could turn out to be true. 6 months after the memorable traffic court incident, a series of events unfolded that would once again bring Agent Robert Thompson's path across Judge Henderson's in an unexpected way. This time, the circumstances were far more personal and would test both their professional boundaries and human understanding. It began on an ordinary Monday morning when Judge Henderson was walking to her usual coffee shop before court. The street was bustling with the typical downtown crowd, business professionals hurrying to their offices, students rushing to classes, and tourists consulting their phones for directions. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until she heard rapid footsteps approaching from behind. Before she could turn around, someone grabbed her arm firmly but gently. It was Robert, no longer in his oversized hoodie but wearing a fitted black jacket. His expression was intense as he guided her toward a nearby doorway. "Please come with me, Your Honor. Don't look back." The judge, startled but maintaining her composure, allowed herself to be led into the building. "Agent Thompson, what's going on?" "We've been monitoring a credible threat against several judicial figures in the city," he explained in a low voice, positioning himself between her and the street-facing windows. "You're one of the potential targets. We believe it's connected to a case you presided over last year." The case he referred to had involved a local organized crime figure. Though it had been a relatively straightforward drug trafficking conviction, the judge had handed down a particularly severe sentence due to the defendant's extensive criminal history and lack of remorse. "We've had surveillance on you for the past week," Robert continued, checking his phone as it buzzed with incoming messages. "This morning, we intercepted communications suggesting an imminent attempt on your life. A team is securing your courthouse office as we speak." Judge Henderson felt her judicial calm waver slightly. In 20 years on the bench, she'd received threats before, but something in Robert's demeanor told her this was different. What exactly did they intercept? A contract was put out through underground channels. The initial plan was to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, but we have reason to believe they've moved up their timeline and might attempt something more direct. He paused, listening to something through his earpiece. "We need to move you to a secure location until we can neutralize the threat." What followed was a carefully orchestrated sequence of movements that opened the judge's eyes to the intricate world of protective operations. Robert's team had already prepared a safe house, complete with secure communications and round-the-clock protection. The location, a modest apartment in an unremarkable building, was specifically chosen to be overlooked. During the first day in protective custody, Judge Henderson observed the professionalism and dedication of the Secret Service team. Robert, she learned, had specifically requested to lead this protection detail after recognizing her name in the threat assessment reports. "You showed me respect and understanding in your courtroom," he explained during a quiet moment, as they waited for updates from the investigative team. "Even when you had reason to doubt my story. I haven't forgotten that." The judge smiled, remembering their first encounter. "I did more than doubt your story, Agent Thompson. I practically laughed you out of court. But you listened when it mattered," he replied. "That's more than many would have done." As hours turned into days, Judge Henderson got to know the human side of the young agent whose courtroom appearance had become courthouse legend. She learned that he had grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania, raised by his grandmother after losing his parents in a car accident. His decision to join the Secret Service had been inspired by a chance encounter with an agent during a high school field trip to Washington, D.C. On the third day of protective custody, there was a breakthrough in the case. Robert's team, working in conjunction with local law enforcement, had tracked down the source of the threat. The orchestrator turned out to be not the convicted crime boss as they'd suspected, but his younger brother, who had been attempting to prove himself to the organization. The brother made mistakes, Robert explained as he briefed the judge on the developments. He tried to hire local talent instead of bringing in professionals. That's what initially caught our attention. Professional hit men don't advertise on local dark web forums. The takedown operation was swift and precise. Multiple arrests were made simultaneously across the city, dismantling not just the immediate threat but uncovering a broader network of criminal activities. Judge Henderson followed the operations through secure communications, impressed by the level of coordination and precision involved. When it was finally safe for her to return home, the judge had gained a new perspective on the complex web of law enforcement that worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The experience had humanized the justice system in a way that 20 years on the bench never had. "Thank you," she told Robert on their last day together. "Not just for protecting me, but for showing me another side of justice." He smiled, that same quiet, confident smile she remembered from traffic court. "Just doing our job, Your Honor." Though I have to admit, this was more satisfying than explaining a speeding ticket. As life returned to normal, Judge Henderson noticed subtle changes in how she approached her duties. Her sentencing decisions, while still firm, came with a deeper understanding of their ripple effects. She became more aware of the unseen protectors in and around her courthouse, acknowledging them with a quiet nod that conveyed her newfound appreciation. The experience had also given her a unique insight into the character of the young agent who had first appeared in her courtroom in an oversized hoodie. Robert Thompson's dedication to duty, his quiet professionalism, and his unwavering commitment to protecting others had left a lasting impression. Months later, when she heard that Robert had received a commendation for his role in uncovering the broader criminal network during her protection detail, Judge Henderson felt a surge of pride. The young man who had once stood before her bench, facing down laughter and skepticism, had proven himself not just as a protector of individuals, but as a guardian of justice itself. A year after the protection detail incident, life had settled back into its regular rhythm at the Boston Federal Courthouse. Judge Henderson continued her duties with renewed perspective, but the events involving Agent Thompson seemed to have reached their natural conclusion. That was until a high-profile international fraud case landed on her docket, bringing with it unexpected complications and familiar faces. The case involved a sophisticated cryptocurrency scheme that had defrauded investors across multiple countries. As Judge Henderson reviewed the case files in her chambers, she noticed several sealed documents from various federal agencies, including the Secret Service's Investigative Division. During the first day of preliminary hearings, she immediately recognized one of the suited individuals sitting in the back of her courtroom, Robert Thompson, though few would have recognized him in his crisp suit and tie, a far cry from his previous appearances in her courtroom. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. The proceedings began routinely enough, with the prosecution outlining a complex web of digital transactions and shell companies. The defendant, a tech entrepreneur named James Chen, sat confidently beside his team of high-powered attorneys. But something about his demeanor struck the judge as oddly familiar. During a recess, Robert approached the bench after the courtroom had cleared. "Your Honor, there's something you need to know about this case. It's connected to the counterfeiting operation from last year." The judge leaned forward, intrigued. "The diplomatic credentials case?" "Yes, ma'am. Chen isn't just a cryptocurrency fraudster. We believe his digital payment platform was being used to launder money for the same organization we took down. But there's more to it than that." Robert explained that Chen's cryptocurrency operation had been a sophisticated front. While investors focused on their digital losses, physical currency and forged documents were being moved through a complex network of seemingly legitimate businesses. The Secret Service had been building this case for months, piecing together connections that spanned continents. "The real problem," Robert continued, "is that Chen has embedded himself deeply in legitimate business circles. He's made powerful friends, including some in diplomatic circles. This case goes beyond simple fraud." As the trial progressed over the next few weeks, Judge Henderson watched the proceedings with keen interest. The prosecution presented evidence of millions in fraudulent transactions, but she could sense there were layers to the case that couldn't be revealed in open court. Then came the day that changed everything. During cross-examination, one of Chen's attorneys suddenly produced documents suggesting that key evidence had been obtained illegally. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the prosecution scrambled to respond. Judge Henderson called an immediate recess and summoned both legal teams to her chambers. As they argued about the admissibility of evidence, she noticed Robert slip quietly into the room, positioning himself near the door. "Your Honor," Chen's lead attorney began, "we move for immediate dismissal based on constitutional violations in the collection of evidence." Before she could respond, Robert stepped forward. "If I may, Your Honor, I have information relevant to this matter." He produced a sealed envelope from his jacket. "This just arrived from the Department of Justice." The documents inside revealed a twist that no one in the room had expected. Chen's legal team had fabricated their claims of illegal evidence collection. More significantly, they had done so using forged federal documents that matched the style and technique of the diplomatic credentials from the previous year's counterfeiting case. "Mr. Chen," Judge Henderson addressed the defendant directly, "would you care to explain why your defense team is presenting forged federal documents in my courtroom?" The entrepreneur's confident facade cracked slightly. His eyes darted to the door, then back to his attorneys. The lead attorney, looking suddenly pale, requested a brief recess to confer with his client. "Denied," the judge stated firmly. "Agent Thompson, do you have anything to add?" Robert stepped forward again. "Yes, Your Honor. We have reason to believe that Mr. Chen's attorneys were unaware of the forged nature of these documents. They were provided these materials by a third party who, as of 20 minutes ago, was taken into custody at Logan International Airport. The revelation sent shockwaves through the legal teams. Chen's attorneys, realizing they had unknowingly presented fraudulent evidence, immediately moved to withdraw from the case. Chen himself sat in stunned silence, his carefully constructed defense crumbling around him. What followed was a masterclass in judicial management. Judge Henderson maintained strict control of her courtroom as additional evidence was presented showing Chen's connections to international criminal organizations. The cryptocurrency fraud had been merely the tip of the iceberg. Robert's team had orchestrated a brilliant sting operation, allowing Chen to believe he could outmaneuver the justice system using the same forgery network he'd helped finance. Instead, he had walked right into their trap, attempting to use fraudulent documents in federal court. As Chen was led away in custody, Judge Henderson couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come from that first traffic court appearance. Robert had evolved from the underestimated agent in an oversized hoodie to a key player in bringing down an international criminal enterprise. Later that evening, as she prepared to leave the courthouse, she found Robert waiting near her chambers. "Nice work today," she said with a smile. "Though I suspect there's still more to this story than what came out in court." He nodded, his expression serious. "Always is, Your Honor. But thanks to you, we've closed a significant chapter. Your handling of the case gave us everything we needed." "We make a good team, Agent Thompson," she replied, gathering her belongings. "Though I hope our next encounter involves fewer international criminals." "Actually," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "there's something else you should know." He handed her another envelope, this one marked with presidential seals. Inside was an invitation to a ceremony at the White House, where Robert would be receiving a Distinguished Service Medal for his role in dismantling the international forgery network. And there, listed as a special guest, was her name. "Couldn't have done it without you, Judge," he said simply. Sometimes justice needs both the spotlight and the shadows to work properly. As she watched him walk away, Judge Henderson realized that their unlikely partnership had represented something larger than either of them, a reminder that justice, in all its forms, worked best when its various guardians worked in harmony, each playing their unique role in maintaining the delicate balance between law and order. The White House ceremony was scheduled for a crisp autumn morning, the kind that painted Washington, D.C. in shades of gold and crimson. Judge Henderson found herself standing in the East Room, surrounded by some of the nation's highest-ranking law enforcement officials and diplomatic personnel. The grandeur of the setting was a far cry from her usual courtroom environment. Robert Thompson stood near the podium, his dress uniform immaculate. Gone was any trace of the casual delivery driver or the undercover agent. Today, he represented the highest ideals of federal service. But what caught the judge's attention wasn't the ceremony itself, it was what happened during the reception afterward. As guests mingled over coffee and light refreshments, a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 70s approached Robert. The judge watched as the young agent's typically composed demeanor shifted into one of surprise and deep respect. The older man was retired Special Agent Thomas O'Brien, a legendary figure within the Secret Service who had protected 5 presidents during his 30-year career. "So you're the one who turned a traffic ticket into an international investigation," O'Brien said, shaking Robert's hand warmly. "Reminds me of a case back in '82. Sometimes the biggest breaks come from the smallest details." Judge Henderson moved closer, catching fragments of their conversation. O'Brien was sharing a story about a counterfeit operation he had broken up in Miami, which had started with nothing more than a parking violation. The parallels to Robert's case were striking. "The real art," O'Brien was saying, "isn't in the dramatic moments. It's in recognizing the patterns in everyday things. Like your food delivery cover, brilliant in its simplicity. We used to pose as maintenance workers, but these days, everyone's got cameras in their pockets. You adapted to the times." The judge watched as Robert absorbed every word from the veteran agent. It was a reminder that behind every successful operation were decades of accumulated wisdom and experience, passed down through generations of dedicated professionals. Later, during a quiet moment, Robert introduced her to O'Brien. "This is Judge Henderson, sir. She's the one who gave me the chance to explain myself that day in traffic court." "Ah, the judge with good instincts," O'Brien smiled. "You know, Your Honor, what impressed me most about this case wasn't just the outcome. It was how it demonstrated the importance of trust between different branches of justice. Too often, we work in silos." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. Security personnel moved swiftly but discreetly toward the doors. Robert's posture changed instantly, his situational awareness kicking in. But before he could move, O'Brien placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Watch," the older agent said quietly. The disturbance turned out to be minor, a misunderstanding about credentials at the security checkpoint. But O'Brien used it as a teaching moment. "See how the team responded? No panic, no overreaction. They assessed, contained, and resolved. That's the mark of true professionals." Throughout the day, Judge Henderson observed the subtle interplay between the various law enforcement agencies represented at the ceremony. The visible medals and commendations told only part of the story. The real narrative was in the quiet conversations, the shared experiences, and the mutual respect between those who served in different capacities. During the formal presentation, Robert's citation mentioned his exceptional judgment and innovative approach to complex investigations. But it was what wasn't in the official record that struck the judge as most significant: the human elements, the trust built between individuals, the moments of uncertainty that required faith in one's training and instincts. As the ceremony concluded, she found herself reflecting on her own role in this story. A simple traffic court interaction had opened her eyes to a world of law enforcement she had only peripherally understood before. Her position on the bench was just one part of a larger system of justice, each component depending on the others to function effectively. The day's events were winding down when Robert approached her one last time. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you, Your Honor," he said, his expression thoughtful. "That day in traffic court, I could have had the citation dismissed through official channels. But I chose to appear in person because part of our job is maintaining the public's trust in the system. Even when we operate in the shadows, we have to respect the light. His words resonated with her own judicial philosophy. The law worked best when it balanced authority with accountability, power with responsibility. "You taught me something that day too, Agent Thompson," she replied. "Sometimes the most important judgments we make are about trusting our instincts when something seems different from the ordinary." As they prepared to leave the White House, O'Brien joined them one final time. "You know," he said, looking between the judge and Robert, "in all my years of service, I've learned that the best outcomes happen when different parts of the justice system really see each other, not just as roles or positions, but as people dedicated to the same principles." The autumn sun was setting as they descended the White House steps, casting long shadows across the immaculate grounds. Judge Henderson thought about how this ceremony, meant to honor past achievements, had really illuminated something more important about the future, the continuing evolution of how justice was served and protected. Back in Boston, her courtroom would remain the same, but her understanding of what happened beyond those walls had been forever changed. She would continue to uphold the law with fairness and wisdom, knowing that she was part of a larger network of dedicated individuals, each playing their part in maintaining the delicate balance of justice. And somewhere in the city, perhaps behind the wheel of a delivery van or blending into a crowd, Robert Thompson would continue his own mission, protecting the principles they both served. Their paths had crossed in an unexpected way, but together they had demonstrated that true justice was a collaborative effort, built on trust, respect, and the dedication of those who served it in all its forms. 3 months after the White House ceremony, an unexpected development brought a new dimension to the ongoing saga. The Boston Federal Courthouse was preparing for a major renovation project, one that would modernize its security systems while preserving its historic character. Judge Henderson found herself serving on the planning committee, reviewing proposals for the upgrades. During one of the planning meetings, she noticed something peculiar in the security contractor's presentation. The proposed surveillance system had subtle flaws that most people would overlook, but her experiences with Robert had taught her to pay attention to such details. The contractor's credentials seemed impeccable, yet something felt off. Following her instincts, she made a discreet inquiry through proper channels. Within hours, she received an urgent call from a familiar number. "Your instincts were right," Robert's voice was tense on the phone. "The renovation project has been compromised. We've been tracking a group attempting to infiltrate federal buildings through construction contracts. They're after more than just building plans." The next day, she met Robert in a secure conference room. He had aged slightly since the White House ceremony, new lines of responsibility etched around his eyes. The group we're dealing with specializes in planting long-term surveillance equipment during renovation projects. They've hit courthouses in 3 other cities. "What's their end game?" the judge asked, reviewing the files he had brought. "They're building a network of surveillance points in federal buildings. Think about it, a courthouse renovation is perfect cover for installing unauthorized monitoring systems. Once the work is complete, they'd have eyes and ears inside some of the most sensitive locations in the federal justice system." The revelation sparked a complex operation. Rather than immediately exposing the contractors, Robert's team saw an opportunity to trace the network back to its source. Judge Henderson found herself in a delicate position, needing to balance her role on the planning committee with the knowledge of an ongoing federal investigation. "We need to let them think their proposal is being seriously considered," Robert explained. "But we'll need your help to control the information they receive." Over the next few weeks, the judge watched in amazement as Robert's team orchestrated an elaborate counterintelligence operation. The contractors were fed carefully curated information, while the real security plans remained protected. Every meeting, every document shared, was part of a carefully constructed narrative designed to draw out the bigger players. During one planning session, she observed Robert posing as an IT consultant, methodically documenting the contractor's proposals while secretly gathering intelligence. His ability to maintain his cover while extracting crucial information reminded her of their first encounter in traffic court. The operation reached its climax during a final proposal meeting. As the contractors presented their detailed plans, federal agents were simultaneously raiding offices in 4 different cities. The evidence uncovered revealed connections to foreign intelligence services and organized crime syndicates. The courthouse renovation project was just the tip of the iceberg, Robert briefed her afterward. They had similar operations planned for a dozen other federal buildings. Your attention to detail helped us uncover a major security breach before it happened. The aftermath of the operation brought significant changes to federal building security protocols. Judge Henderson found herself consulting with judicial committees nationwide, sharing her experiences to help other courts protect themselves from similar infiltration attempts. One evening, as she was leaving the courthouse, she spotted a familiar figure in the parking garage. Robert was leaning against a column, but this time he wasn't in disguise. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said, falling into step beside her. "Your involvement in this case went above and beyond." "I had a good teacher," she replied with a smile. "You showed me that security isn't just about cameras and checkpoints. It's about being aware, trusting your instincts." They walked to her car in companionable silence, both reflecting on how far they'd come from that first traffic court encounter. The setting sun cast long shadows through the garage, reminiscent of their many clandestine meetings over the past months. "You know," Robert said, pausing near her car, "when I first started in the service, I thought our job was mainly about physical protection, keeping the bad guys away from the people and places we guard. But cases like this remind me that sometimes the biggest threats aren't the obvious ones." Judge Henderson nodded, understanding completely. Her own perspective on justice and security had evolved dramatically since meeting Robert. "Sometimes," she replied, "the most important protections are the ones nobody sees." As she prepared to leave, Robert handed her a small package. Inside was a challenge coin, a Secret Service tradition normally reserved for members of the agency. One side bore the service's insignia, the other a simple inscription, "Justice sees what others miss." "You're one of us now," he said simply. "Not officially, of course, but in all the ways that matter." The gesture touched her deeply. In her decades on the bench, she had received many honors, but this simple token of respect from the clandestine world of federal protection meant something special. That evening, as she sat in her home office, the challenge coin resting on her desk, Judge Henderson reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple traffic violation. Each chapter, from the counterfeiting case to the White House ceremony to this latest security operation, had peeled back another layer of the complex relationship between justice and security. She picked up the coin, feeling its weight in her hand. It was a reminder that true justice required vigilance on many fronts, from the visible authority of her courtroom to the invisible guardians who worked in the shadows. Robert Thompson had shown her that these worlds weren't separate, but deeply interconnected, each supporting the other in the endless task of protecting the principles they served. As winter settled over Boston, bringing short days and long shadows, Judge Henderson found herself increasingly aware of the subtle interplay between the visible and hidden aspects of justice. The challenge coin from Robert had become a daily reminder, sitting on her desk like a silent guardian. But nothing could have prepared her for the events that would unfold in the coming weeks. It began with a series of seemingly unrelated incidents. First, there was an uptick in cybersecurity alerts at federal buildings across the city. Then, several routine security checks began showing unusual patterns. Most people wouldn't have noticed anything amiss, but the judge's experiences with Robert had taught her to look beneath the surface. One morning, as she arrived at the courthouse, she noticed the regular security guard, Officer Torres, was missing from his usual post. In his place was a new face, someone who handled the security protocols with mechanical precision but lacked Torres's familiar warmth. During the lunch recess, she made a casual inquiry about Torres's absence. The responses she received were professionally vague: vacation time, personal days, nothing unusual. But something didn't feel right. She was reviewing case files in her chambers when her secure phone, the one Robert had given her after the renovation operation, buzzed with a message: "Things aren't what they seem. Wait for contact." The message was unsigned, but she recognized Robert's style. Over the next few days, she maintained her regular routine while keeping a watchful eye on the subtle changes around the courthouse. New maintenance workers appeared, security protocols shifted slightly, and there was an almost imperceptible tension in the air. On Thursday afternoon, she received another message. "Coffee shop across the street, 3 p.m. Watch the window." At the appointed time, she stood at her chamber window, ostensibly reviewing documents. Across the street, she spotted Robert sitting at a window table, dressed as a business professional. He appeared to be working on a laptop, but she recognized the subtle hand signals he had taught her: danger, infiltration, watch the inside. That evening, as she prepared to leave, her phone buzzed again: "Your chambers, 10 minutes. Use the back entrance." When she returned to her chambers, Robert was already there, his expression grave. "We've uncovered a sophisticated operation," he began without preamble. "Remember the renovation contractors we caught? They had a backup plan. They've been slowly replacing legitimate courthouse personnel with their own people." "Officer Torres?" she asked, thinking of the missing guard. "He's safe. We extracted him and his family when we noticed the pattern. But they've infiltrated deeper than we initially thought. The new guard, 2 maintenance workers, even one of the cafeteria staff, all plants." The implications were staggering. The courthouse wasn't just a target for surveillance, it was being systematically infiltrated from within. "What are they after?" "We believe they're after specific case files, ones relating to pending federal indictments. But there's more." Robert moved to the window, checking the street below. "They're using the courthouse as a test run. If they succeed here, they plan to replicate the operation in federal buildings nationwide." Over the next hour, Robert outlined an intricate counter-operation. Judge Henderson's position made her uniquely valuable. She could move through the courthouse without arousing suspicion while helping to identify potential security breaches. "It's dangerous," Robert warned. "These people are professionals. If they suspect you're onto them." "I took an oath to protect justice," she replied firmly. "That doesn't just mean making rulings from the bench." The operation unfolded slowly over the next 2 weeks. Judge Henderson maintained her normal routine while secretly documenting suspicious activities. She learned to notice things that previously would have escaped her attention: slight differences in security procedures, unusual patterns in staff movements, subtle changes in building access logs. Robert's team worked in parallel, building a comprehensive picture of the infiltration. They discovered that the fake personnel were part of a larger network, one that had been attempting to compromise judicial proceedings across multiple jurisdictions. The breakthrough came during a routine fire drill. As the courthouse evacuated, Judge Henderson noticed one of the new maintenance workers heading not toward the exit but deeper into the building. She discreetly signaled to Robert's team, who had been waiting for just such an opportunity. The subsequent raid was swift and silent. Multiple arrests were made simultaneously across different floors of the courthouse. The fake maintenance worker was caught attempting to access the secure server room, while others were found with sophisticated hacking equipment and forged credentials. In the aftermath, as federal agents processed the scene, Robert joined Judge Henderson in her chambers. "You did good work," he said, his relief evident. "We've been tracking this group for months, but we couldn't have cracked it without your help." "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, thinking back to all the lessons he'd taught her about security and observation. "Though I have to admit, this wasn't quite what I imagined when I went to law school." The significance of what they'd uncovered became clear in the following days. The group had been attempting to manipulate court records, plant evidence, and compromise witness protection data. Their ultimate goal was to undermine the federal justice system from within. As the regular courthouse staff returned to their posts, including a very grateful Officer Torres, Judge Henderson observed the building's rhythms returning to normal. But she knew things would never be quite the same. She had seen firsthand how justice needed both light and shadow to function, the transparent authority of the law working in concert with the hidden protectors who guarded its integrity. One afternoon, as she sat in her chambers holding the Secret Service challenge coin, she reflected on how far she'd come from being the judge who had laughed at a young agent's explanation in traffic court. She had learned that justice wasn't just about making rulings and interpreting laws, it was about protecting the very system that made those laws meaningful. Robert's final words to her before returning to his regular duties had stuck with her. "You know, Judge, sometimes the best guardians of justice are the ones who understand both worlds, the public face of the law and its hidden defenders. You've become one of those rare bridges between the two." She placed the challenge coin back on her desk, a reminder of the ongoing balance between transparency and security, between the visible and the hidden aspects of justice. The courthouse around her hummed with its usual activity, but now she understood the complex symphony of protection that made that ordinary activity possible. The events at the Boston Federal Courthouse had far-reaching implications that continued to ripple through the justice system. 1 year after the infiltration attempt, Judge Henderson found herself addressing a closed session of the Judicial Conference, sharing lessons learned from her experiences while carefully protecting the classified aspects of the operations. The morning of her presentation, she stood at the podium in a secure conference room, facing a collection of the nation's most senior judges. Among them sat Chief Justice Williams, whose intense focus reflected the gravity of the subject matter. In the back of the room, barely noticeable unless you knew to look, stood Robert Thompson, now promoted to Deputy Special Agent in charge of judicial protection. "Security in our courts isn't just about metal detectors and surveillance cameras," she began. "It's about understanding that threats to justice can come in many forms, often hiding in plain sight. What began as a simple traffic court appearance taught me that sometimes the most effective protectors of our system are the ones we never notice." As she spoke, she could see the impact of her words on her colleagues. Many had experienced their own security concerns, but few had glimpsed the depth of protection that operated silently around them. She shared carefully sanitized versions of her experiences, emphasizing the importance of cooperation between judicial officers and security services. During the lunch break, Chief Justice Williams approached her. "Your experiences are remarkable," he said thoughtfully. "They've highlighted a gap in our system, the need for better integration between judicial awareness and security operations. We'd like you to head a new committee focused on judicial security awareness." The offer was unexpected but felt right. It was a chance to formalize the lessons she'd learned, to help other judges understand the delicate balance between maintaining open courts and protecting the integrity of the justice system. Later that afternoon, she found Robert waiting in a quiet corner of the conference center. He'd aged well in the years since their first meeting, the youthful agent in an oversized hoodie now carrying himself with the quiet authority of senior leadership. "Quite a journey from traffic court," he said with a slight smile. "Who would have thought that day would lead to all this?" "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments," she replied. "Though I have to admit, I never imagined that laughing at a Secret Service agent would turn out to be one of the most educational experiences of my career." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message on Robert's phone. His expression turned serious as he read it. "Remember Chen, from the cryptocurrency case? He's escaped custody during transport. Early intelligence suggests he's headed back to Boston." Judge Henderson felt a familiar tension return. "He's coming after the evidence?" "We think so. But this time, we're ready. The systems you helped put in place, the awareness you've created, they've changed how we handle these situations. Chen doesn't know he's walking into a very different courthouse than the one he left." Over the next few days, as they tracked Chen's movements, Judge Henderson observed the subtle ballet of security operations with new understanding. The protocols she'd helped develop were now in full effect, invisible to most, but forming an intricate web of protection around the court's daily operations. Chen was apprehended before he could even enter the courthouse, his elaborate plan undone by the very systems he didn't know existed. As he was led away, Judge Henderson watched from her chamber's window, reflecting on how much had changed since that first traffic court appearance. That evening, as the sun set over Boston, she sat in her chambers reviewing the draft proposal for the new Judicial Security Awareness Program. A knock at her door revealed Robert, carrying 2 cups of coffee from their usual shop across the street. "I thought you might need this," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. "Writing new protocols isn't quite as exciting as catching international criminals, but it might be more important in the long run." "You know what I've learned through all of this," she replied, picking up the challenge coin that still sat on her desk. "Justice isn't just about making the right decisions in court. It's about protecting the system that allows those decisions to be made fairly and safely." Robert nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "That's why your story matters. It shows that the best protection comes when different parts of the system truly understand each other." As they stood looking out over the city they'd worked so hard to protect, Judge Henderson reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple traffic violation. Each chapter had revealed new layers of complexity in the relationship between justice and security, between the public face of the law and its hidden guardians. The challenge coin caught the last rays of sunlight, its inscription gleaming, "Justice sees what others miss." It was more than just a motto now, it was a reminder of the delicate balance between transparency and security, between the visible and invisible aspects of justice. In the years that followed, the story of the judge and the Secret Service agent became something of a legend in law enforcement circles. Not for its dramatic moments or high-profile arrests, but for what it revealed about the true nature of justice, that it worked best when those who served it in different capacities could see and understand each other's roles. Judge Henderson continued to preside over her courtroom with the same fairness and wisdom she'd always shown, but now with a deeper appreciation for the complex symphony of protection that made justice possible. And somewhere in the city, Robert Thompson continued his own mission, knowing that their unlikely partnership had helped create a stronger, more resilient system of justice. Their story served as a reminder that sometimes the most important guardians of justice were those who could bridge different worlds, those who understood that true protection came not just from authority or secrecy alone, but from the careful balance between the two. In the end, it wasn't just about protecting courthouses or catching criminals. It was about preserving the delicate ecosystem that allowed justice to flourish in both light and shadow. As the last light faded from her chambers, Judge Henderson smiled, knowing that somewhere in the city, other guardians were taking up their posts, continuing the endless work of protecting the principles she had spent her life serving. The traffic court judge and the underestimated agent had shown that justice was strongest when its various guardians worked together, each playing their part in maintaining the delicate balance between law and order.